Welcome to DM the PM Unlock Product Concepts podcast, where we cut through the noise of product jargon to deliver actionable step-by-step insights from industry practitioners, helping founders and product leaders turn complex concepts into clear practical strategies you can apply today. And as you've probably been listening for so long, this podcast is split into 4 different sections. We'll start with getting to know the guest with an intro section. Then we'll go into understanding key myths around the topic. After that, we'll discuss the threshold concept, what's the minimum amount of information someone needs to know about the topic, and we'll finish off with frequently asked questions. So a bit of intro about me. I'm Diana. I'm your podcast host. I'm a product coach and consultant. I help startups and mid-sized tech companies build impactful products in weeks, not months. And I help drive business growth by creating an efficient product development process, validating ideas early, and establishing effective customer feedback loops. And today we will talk about what it takes to succeed in product. I have the pleasure of welcoming Caroline Clark as my guest for this topic. Caroline has a diverse experience as a product leader across various different companies like Holiday Extras, Simprints, ISO Health, and Simply Health. I can see you have a preference for B2B health-focused businesses. And now Caroline is a coach. She's an accredited product coach. She helps women in product who feel stuck and unsure about their career to find and carve their own path through high-impact coaching. And this is why she's a brilliant person to really take us through what are the skills needed to succeed in product. One, because of her vast experience as a product leader, but also because of her experience working directly with people going through those challenges at the moment. And I have to admit, Caroline, the other thing I love about all your content on LinkedIn is you have a passion for space and also passion for psychology, but you're bringing those together in your content. And I love that unified vision that you have. So it's brilliant. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you for the feedback on the space and psychology thing, because it's somewhat eclectic, but yeah, finding a way of bringing it together. 2 big passions in my life.
Exactly. I mean, you have the Lego poster that you created behind you, exactly, on space. Yep. Well, for anyone who's not on YouTube, yeah, they won't see that, but it's okay.
It's the Lego Milky Way galaxy set.
Exactly.
It was perfect. A birthday present from my partner.
Oh, that's really nice. Great. So can you tell me a bit more about how did you get into product?
Yeah, so I've been in product now for 11 years and I fell into product, which I think is a fairly common thing for people. It's not like we learned about this in careers fairs at school. I don't even know that it was a thing really that people talked about back when I was at school. But at the time, I was actually a business analyst and I was working as a contractor with a local government in London. And it was under kind of the banner of austerity at the time, early 20s, when governments needed to cut money from budgets. And there was a big movement, a big desire to shift demand for council services from telephone and letter to website, which was a cheaper transaction channel. They called it channel shift. So my role initially was to do all of the demand analysis and work with the different services, whether that was building control or planning or registrars, which was births, deaths, marriages, to really understand their user experience, their user journey, and figure out how we could digitalize that. And I absolutely loved it. It was my first taste of, I guess, being a product owner more at that time. Agile was new to me. So very, very steep learning curve being part of this team. And I was there for about a year and learnt loads, and it really whetted my appetite for moving into product more officially. So when that contract ended, I looked for a product role that was available more locally to avoid like having to commute into London from Kent, where I lived at the time. And I found Holiday Extras, which was a local-based travel company. They were looking for a product owner, as they advertised it. It later became a PM, and I joined their company. They were very, very early on in their agile journey, agile and product management. So the other product owners were all associate directors, and I was the first external hire. So I think I was like their guinea pig to see whether it would work or not. But I was with them for about 5 years, following the maturation of like product management as a discipline in the organization. My own career, I started out very generalist, working with 0 to 1 products. And then I specialized into technical product management. And by the end of the time at Holiday Extras, I knew I had a bunch of skills and I really enjoyed product. And I was thinking, what can I do that's like doing some good in the world with all of these skills and experience now? And I was very, very interested in health tech. So I actually completely uprooted my life and my career from Kent and moved to Cambridge and started working for Simprints, which was a startup. And what they built is fingerprint technology that is used in humanitarian and healthcare projects across the global south. So our big projects were in Tanzania, Ethiopia, Bangladesh, working on things like deworming programs and maternal health. So it was really, really good exposure, really challenged my perspectives on life, on building product, on taking things for granted, about how we interact with technology. From there I went into IESO, which is mental health tech. That was after the pandemic. So it was like 2021 I started working there. And a big motivator for me was the effects of lockdown and the impact that that had on mental health for myself, for people around me, for the nation, for the world as a whole. Like it's a crisis. So how I wanted to be a part of solving that. So I was there for about a year, and that's when I moved into, I guess, product leadership. I'd done bits of coaching and mentoring around the sides, but it was when I first truly stepped up into people management as a product director. And I had a team of product managers and designers that I worked with. And I really enjoyed that. And then from there, I went to Thriver as group product manager, working on diagnostics as a service. So yeah, I've done a few different things over my product career. I guess in a nutshell, I've specialised in B2B health tech and then have moved into the coaching space from there.
It's really, really interesting. Definitely. I think thank you so much for taking me through that. It's a very similar, I think, across the podcast, but like the theme of kind of fell in love with the product side of solving problems. Then it was around, okay, have the base skills, transitioning and changing industries as well, and how easy it is, or what are the things required to move into that. And then now, of course, there's a lot of people who want to know what does progression look like in product. And I think that's always been something even on my own mind of like, what are the different layers? It's still relatively new for kind of everyone to have exposure to product. So there's always a lot of questions on, okay, what skills should I prioritize, or what skills should I build over time? So that's really interesting. And I guess what made you focus on like moving to coaching and specifically focus on women?
Yeah. So I'll answer them as two parts of the same question. Why I got into coaching. So when I was business analyst, I'd done a certification in coaching. So I'd learnt the skills around using the GROW model and a lot of the soft skills of listening and building rapport. And I used that through my product career. So like when I was working with engineers and they were coming to me saying, hey, we've tried this and it's not working, what should we do now? I was using those coaching skills to draw out of them, well, what are we trying to achieve? And what have you already tried? And what's not worked? What could work? What are the options? What are we going to do differently going forwards? So I could see those coaching skills being useful in those not formalized management settings, but just as part of working as a team, a highly functioning, high performance team. And then it was really when I went into people management, I recognized that I got so much energy and enjoyment out of working one-to-one with people and really helping them realize what they're capable of and figuring out what the goal is, career goal, or, you know, even micro goals on like, how are we going to build this product? Like just figuring out what they wanted to achieve and taking them through a process to help them get there. So when I left full-time employment in early 2023, and I was thinking, what am I going to do now? The big scary question, it kept coming back to coaching and working one-to-one with people. So yeah, I've moved into that area. And why am I working with women? Well, there's a bigger question, there's a bigger issue around this, which is the lack of gender equity within the tech industry. So the tech industry as a whole, there's stats that say women make up 20 to 25% of the workforce. So there's quite a way to go towards equality and equity in tech. Product itself as a subset of tech does slightly better at sort of 30 to 35%, but it's still not equal representation. And my philosophy is around you need to have good representation on the teams that are building products of the populations that they're serving. You know, we talk about AI is the big thing at the moment, bias in AI. It's being built in because of the training sets that it's on, but also because of how decisions are being made. And if you don't have a diverse range of perspectives involved in that decision-making process, then there's going to be bias there as well. And it's just the right thing to do. We should not be excluding whole sections of society from building products. I'm all about inclusion. So yes, I target women specifically in marketing. I do work with men as well. I have male clients. And I work with people with different intersecting identities as well. So yeah, that's kind of what powers me now as a coach.
That's brilliant. I really like that. I think it's, this whole building products and having different perspectives when you are building it as whatever the product you're building, having a representation of your customers through the decision making, it's definitely really, really important. And I think you might have touched into it talking about the energy that you get from your role, but what do you enjoy the most about your coaching role?
I think it is seeing people come to me with perhaps not being very clear on what they want. And it can start as I'm not very clear, but perhaps they do actually know deep down what it is that they want and they're scared of asking or scared of going after it. And some of that can be due to, you know, conditioning that we have from living in a society, the social norming process. It's like women should behave in a certain way, should go after certain jobs. Men do something else, go after jobs differently, behave differently when you're in work. I think it's not about giving people permission so much as it is about giving them a space to figure this stuff out. Who do they want to be? What do they want? What are they prepared to do to get it? And someone that's encouraging them. So for me, it's really seeing people overcome those limitations, internal limitations, beliefs that they have about themselves. Don't get me wrong, there are systemic barriers there as well. And we explore those and we explore how to push up against the edges of that as well. Like there are in reality some things that prevent us from achieving what we want. But yeah, I think it's really, and it, you know, it's different for each person. It's very individual. So for one person, it might be going for a new job and the process of really evaluating their experience, understanding the impact that they've had and how to talk about that in a way that appeals to hiring managers at a new company so that they build their confidence and even enjoy that process of going for a new job and interviewing and then the outcome, getting that job. It can be that, it can be getting the confidence to speak up in meetings, to have your voice heard. So it's very individual to each client. And I think when we start with understanding what that is and then they later go on to achieve that, that's
nice. Yes, there's a lot of satisfaction from seeing people achieve the things that, you know, overcome some of the challenges that they come to you with. The other part that I think is really interesting about product is that it's a very still fluid role. I think there's a lot of questions around what should I do? How should I do this in the best way possible? There's a lot of but there's also a lot of opportunity there to shape it. So I think this level of coaching, of understanding, what are people's individual strengths and how they can use those, or how can they, put the right goals in place, and kind of linking to this. And I think you also mentioned around using coaching with your engineers. There's so many layers of the product management role, isn't like so many different elements to it. And I think you can easily get lost on what should I double down on, where should I put my focus. And I wanted to ask, is like, throughout your career, as you were going through and kind of driving the change and everything, what skills helped you most in being able to make that next step and progress?
I think if it came down to just one skill, it would be listening. And, when you do your coach training, they teach you how to listen, because it's not just about sitting there and hearing what somebody's saying. It's active listening, which is hearing someone, listening to someone with your whole body. So it's your eyes, like what are your eyes telling you about that person? The non-verbal body language, the pitch, tone, pace, volume of their voice, that can tell you like what their energetic state is in, even if their words say something different. It's also about what someone isn't saying. And I think that's really key. Like with engineers in particular, we can all get swept up in the excitement of a new product idea, and everybody's going along with it. But if you're properly listening, then you hear and you see the people who have that maybe reticence or reservations about what you're doing. And that enables you to kind of just take a moment, a pause, and invite them to share what it is that they're thinking. You don't catch that if you're swept up yourself and you're so focused on getting your point of view across. I think actually it's about maybe not putting your point of view across and giving other people space. And as I say, like really listening to what isn't being said as much as what is. And I think it's a good skill to have with leadership as well.
Okay.
And I'll talk about influence as well. And influence really depends on having that trust and that rapport. Like if I like you, if I know you, if I trust you, I'm more likely to be influenced by you. And the way that you build trust, rapport, know, is asking questions and then properly listening.
Interesting. Okay, so you've been using listening for psychological safety, kind of like building that space for creative thinking and encouraging. And I assume that also helps a lot with people management. But you're also saying that listening is a great skill for kind of building trust with leadership, because I know that's another big part of the product role that I think sometimes doesn't get enough like step-by-step plan of how do you influence. Everyone is like, you influence. And it's like, okay, I influence now. How do you go about it? So you're saying that listening is a key skill that will help anyone drive influence.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I think, we can get so caught up in, I want to influence my boss or the founder to do things in a particular way. It's like, I want to exert my control and power in the situation and have it done the way that I want it to. I don't agree that it needs to be that way. Whereas what I'm saying with listening is it's creating that space for someone to share what they're thinking, because it might be a different perspective. It might be that they reveal something that you haven't considered. It might be that they've got access to more information because it's being discussed like at leadership level. It's not necessarily been cascaded out yet to the rest of the company. It may even be that they can't do that because it's sensitive information. So sometimes things can come up and we think that's really bizarre. Like, where's that coming from? It's really understand, and that holding space and that listening for what's not being said as well, and using questions if a leader is coming to you and saying, like, we really need this done, this particular feature, we really need it done now in the next quarter, we need to prioritize it, move everything else out, and it's coming out of the blue and it's a bit weird, and it's like, well, hold on a minute, because we were planning to do this and the whole team's like geared up for this and we've even started doing some bits on it. There's resistance, and that resistance can become antagonistic in the relationship. So actually just pausing, listening to what they're saying, asking some open questions like, okay, well, what's important about prioritizing this? What are the consequences if we do, if we don't, kind of thing? What's the impact of that? It might reveal more context about that decision that can then help you navigate that change as well.
That's a really good point. I think maybe this also kind of enables you to build empathy. So keep that
Absolutely.
open mind around where are they coming from with this. And this is kind of a bit off track, but I've been wondering about this like level of us and them, just from that influence point of view. I'm wondering if this idea of like, oh yes, product managers are the CEO of the product, I think that has not helped anyone over years. Maybe initially it landed the message of the ownership you get, but I think it has then created this like, oh, we should do everything this way, and then other people being like, well, that's not how we've done it, and there's like a lot of clash in there.
I would agree with that, Diana. I think the PM as a CEO of the product almost created a perspective that the PM is fully autonomous, can act almost alone with their team to go and deliver what they think is right. And the PM role is highly, highly contextual. And that includes relationships. It's relationships with the squad that you're working directly with your peers in product, with your manager, but also with other people around the business. And I hate calling them stakeholders. We know them as stakeholders, but we really need to see them as peers as well, just in different teams. So who are your peers in sales, in marketing, in like clinical, if you're in health, finance, regulatory, like it's what's the context there? The PM needs to be a master at understanding context and calibrating all of those different data points when they're making decisions.
That's a really good point. And one thing I want to cover before we go into kind of the mistakes or like biggest myths about the product career, which I think we're starting to go into, is I wanted to ask about communication, because coming back to kind of influence and the unsaid things, or like, people just throw words that you should do this better. And communication is one of those ones where people are like, communication is really important, but what are the layers of it? To be like, okay, this is a base level of communication, but like amazing communicators do this. Because I like scales, it's like you grow your skill and you start to see progress. But I'm trying to get my head around what could those ones look like for a skill like communication?
Yeah, so I've got a bit of a model for career progression within product. And as part of that, I've identified 6 competencies. And they're core competencies that I think every product manager needs, regardless of what level they're at, what role they're at. You would have different levels of skill acquisition within that. So if I can just cover that slightly first. So they're split into 3 groups. You have your relationship with yourself, which has the competencies of leadership and self-mastery. As a PM, you are leading a team. Some of the PMs that I work with, some of my clients as coaches, do not see themselves as leaders. They see like senior management, senior leadership as leaders. But leadership with a small L as a competency is something that PMs are doing every day. And if you're not effective as a PM. So it's part and parcel of the role. The other competency with relationship with self is around innovation and change. So there we're thinking around creative thinking and adaptability, resilience, how we manage the inflow of ideas that we get from all around the business. The second group is our relationship with other people. And here we would have things like working in groups as a competency, and that can be broken down into things like collaboration, conflict and negotiation, trust building. Communication is the other competency that sits within working with others. So I'll come back to that one in a second. And just to round out, the third group is our relationship with context. And here the two competencies are strategic thinking and decision making. And they kind of are two sides of the same coin, because you need to understand what the goal is and where you're going in order to make decisions on prioritization, for instance. So to come back to communication, underneath that competency, there's then 6 skills that I've broken down. And those 6 skills are clarity in communication, storytelling, empathy, influence and persuasion, language, and active listening, which we've spoken about already. So a well-rounded PM needs to have all of those skills at a competent level. In terms of levels, I think when it comes to communication specifically, there's a model or a heuristic that I use with clients around zooming in and zooming out. And this relates to who it is that you're communicating with. So you've got to think, what is their perspective on things? And when you're working with your team, your squad, you're probably right down in the weeds. So you're at a very granular, very detailed level. Your engineers will come to you with a technical problem and get into the nitty-gritty of how to solve it. And a good PM will have that curiosity and be asking lots of questions and listening for the answers, but you're really in the thick of it. The next level up, which is kind of a bridging level, is from the rooftops. So that's where you zoom out from what the squad may be working on and take a broader perspective, maybe across a couple of different work streams like marketing, doing go-to-market plan, engineers, what they're building with the product, and so on. And then the third level, the top level, is the helicopter view. And that is the perspective that most of senior management and leadership operate at. And the mistake that I see PMs make quite often is to be talking to like the CEO or the CPO in the weeds.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you need to be at that helicopter view to start with, which is quite zoomed out from the detail. It's like top level, what's happening, what are the issues, like, are you on track, are you off track, like, how is this linking into wider company goals, that kind of conversation. Sometimes you need to bring it down to the next level, which might be, you know, from an initiative perspective, how's the initiative going overall? Very rarely do you need to get so down in the details, but I see PMs do that quite often. They take that CEO and go right down into the detail. And there's something as well that as women I see quite often happening, and I've been guilty of it myself as well, which is to go into that level of detail because you feel you have to justify what it is that you're doing, like justify the decision that's been made, or, you know, explain all of the effort that has gone in. And there's some really, really good motivations around that, like giving people in the team credit for what it is that they've done, like recognizing that collaborative effort. But for a senior leader, it's noise, and what they want are the signals. So always make sure that you're giving them the signals, and when they need additional detail, be led by them and them asking their questions.
Wow. Thank you so much. I mean, that is a brilliant, this is exactly the level of detail. So for ComSpot, I like the 6 levels. I need to write them down around. So you're saying, regardless of the level you're at, whether it's in the weeds or rooftops or helicopter view, you kind of have the 6 skills that you want to make sure that storytelling and active listening and all of this is like, what? No, active listening was not part of, was
Yes,
it?
it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As part of communication, you still need to showcase those, but you also have the levels. Because I definitely struggle with those levels for sure. I like visual references, and when you were saying about wait for the signals, I'm just imagining, for, I guess it's more for planes and helicopters, you always have the lights, imagining the dark, someone with the lights. So it's like, maybe this is it. Maybe you just like try and keep it so the plane lands within that narrow view rather than being every single detail, because that's not really what they need. That's a really interesting mental model for myself now, to be like, yeah, actually they're flying a plane. Why would they need to get all those details? And thank you so much for taking, explaining all the different levels. And I love your 3 parts framework. And I wanted to say, maybe this is the threshold concept. Maybe I do kind of say it as like, if that's okay with you, because it explains a lot around the different skills you need to look at your product career.
Yeah.
And what made you create the 3 groupings?
So it's actually a concept that I developed initially last year, and I was talking at Product Tank in London in September, and it was on inclusive leadership. So it's like, how can you be an inclusive leader? And it was there the idea, well, leadership really starts with you. And then leadership is about how you relate to others and then how you relate to context. And it has to be built in that order: yourself, others, context. So I guess kind of the root of the idea was there. And then as I was doing some work on a career progression model that shows the different tracks that you can go in product and the different levels, so it's kind of X and Y axes together, I was thinking, well, how is it that you progress? What is it that you need to work on to develop in order to either move from a generalist PM to a specialist PM or a people manager PM, and then that vertical progression through different levels of seniority? And it kept coming back to soft skills. Hard skills are very, very closely linked to, I guess, factors that change. So if we think about technology, like in the 11 years that I've been in product, the tools and frameworks that we've been using in product have evolved and have changed. So the hard skills are kind of always subject to that outside influence and that change. But the soft skills, once you've acquired them, they stand you in good stead throughout your whole career and in different directions that you go in as well. So one criticism that you could say about the competencies that I've identified are, well, they're the same for any job, not just product. But that's kind of the point, is that if you really, really nail them, you make yourself really versatile and adaptable. You could go in lots of different directions. And that is a really strong basis for progression. You can go in any direction.
And I think it really depends, because the more I think about my own career, you start to think about, the choices you make are around not necessarily a ladder. You want the skills to give you the freedom for a lifestyle that you want to build. So now actually talking about your skills in quite, not generic, but like adaptable ways. So like, what are the skills or approaches as a leader, isn't it? So you want to kind of go up in terms of leading more people or driving change, and that could happen in any context. So that gives you more freedom.
Let's pick up on that, Diana, because you mentioned about innovation and change. And what I've seen happen is that some PMs want to move into leadership roles, which inevitably means that you are leading other people through change, and you have to help them get through that change curve, the shock of, oh, we've got to go in a different direction now, this isn't working. And well, what are we going to do? The sense-making state and the emotions that go on, like the confusion, the maybe frustration and anger, and then eventually coming to a place of peace and then feeling excited about it. And people go through that change curve at different times. As a leader, you need to be going through that change curve ahead of your people, because you need to be a couple of steps ahead to help them. And you also need to have a really healthy relationship with change yourself. And that's why in the competency model, I've put innovation and change sitting with leadership and self-mastery. Again, they're two sides of the same coin. And you need to start with your own attitude and beliefs around change, because if you don't like change, if it freaks you out, then the question is, how are you going to help other people through that as well?
Yeah, it's true. And obviously product management and the whole tech space is constantly changing with new technology. And I was actually recently at an event around AI product managers, and I realized there's so much unknown on how do you build products with AI, where you're moving from a, what's it called, deterministic world into a like non-deterministic and probabilistic. And no one has an answer. But if you want to be a leader in that space, being comfortable with change and exactly what you said, all the different things around your own mastery, and then how do you communicate that to other people, there's really no kind of way to hide around it at the moment with the amount of technological change and everything that everyone's going through. For your framework, how would you tell people to like develop these skills? Because I wanna do this. I'm like, okay, I'm going to write all of this down and then I'll listen back to it. But how do you start with this?
Yeah, so I've got a product manager assessment that I'm still developing, but I can share the link with you, Diana. You can share it afterwards so people can take that. And it's looking at each of the skills under the 6 competencies in terms of the skill acquisition, skill development. So are you a novice? You've never done this before. Are you aware of this? Do you do this sometimes under guidance from other people? Do you do this on your own quite regularly? Do you teach this back to other people? So there's an element of self-assessment where you can map out where you are on each of these things. You could use it with your manager. So get them to do the assessment on you and then compare and see where the similarities and the differences are. And then I think it's about identifying growth areas from that, as well as the things that you're really strong at. And this is where like my personal philosophy is we should lean into our strengths more, because they're what help us stand out. And growth areas are something to work on to a point, but there's almost like diminishing returns. If you spend too long focused on your growth areas, you're not spending enough time on your strengths and really developing what stands you out from everybody else. And that's particularly important when you're looking for jobs as well, or going for promotion, or thinking about what's your next career move. Is like, well, what are you really good at and what do you really enjoy? So it's helpful in identifying where those different areas are, strengths and growth areas. And then I think it's about looking for the opportunities to work on those areas. And learning now can happen in so many different ways. You've got obviously blogs and books and podcasts that you can read, and they're quite accessible. A lot of them I kind of counsel people to take with a pinch of salt, particularly books by the thought leaders, because they're not necessarily context specific. So they're written for a context usually that's a US market, very affluent, maybe West Coast based, Silicon Valley. So how generalizable are the lessons from that particular context to Europe, UK, larger companies that might actually come from quite a traditional background, if I'm thinking some of the companies that I've worked with, or startups even, where the funding landscape and the culture is very different in the UK. So you do have to apply some contextual understanding and not beat yourself up if your company doesn't look exactly like that. And so that's where assets like mentors and coaches can help you, is join the dots and adapt what you're learning from elsewhere to your particular situation. And particularly coaching, because it takes a very person-centered approach. So it's, where are you starting from? What do you know now? Where do you want to get to? And working through the options and the development to get there. There's courses, of course, there's a whole range. And I think blended learning, with it being so accessible now, is probably the best way to go. But it starts by identifying what is it that you want to learn.
Yeah, identifying growth opportunities for sure, but knowing what your strengths are. A lot of the times with strengths, you want to know there's more, like there's new layers of how can you do this better and better. And I have like 2 questions on that, but one of them is, how can you lead that conversation with your manager to be like, hey, let's focus on my strengths and show me what, focusing on my strengths could really take me to, versus get me to this like great level across everything. Because I feel like that's the default, isn't it? People see gaps and then they're like going to help you to like fill all your gaps, rather than taking a balanced approach like the one you